I want to say my babies, your mama loves you so much. I just feel in my heart that you're okay. Her voice trembled, her face twisted in anguish. Her words were raw, pleading, desperate, and America believed her. For 9 long days, the nation watched as Susan Smith, a 23-year-old mother from Union, South Carolina, sobbed in front of television cameras, begging for the return of her 2 missing sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex. But what if it was all a lie? Welcome back to Criminal Mind Tales, where we walk you from the beginning of a case through the deception, down into the dark, and sometimes into the minds of those who hide in plain sight. This is a case of Susan Smith, the mother who begged for help on national TV while knowing the truth the whole time. And when the truth finally surfaced, it shattered far more than just the illusion of a grieving parent. It fractured community, exposed chilling manipulation, and made her one of the most hated women in America. Buckle up, because this story isn't just about what she did. It's about how long she let us all believe she didn't. Union, South Carolina, October 25th, 1994. A red Mazda Protege, 2 car seats, and one mother's terrifying account of a carjacking that would ignite the media like wildfire. Susan said it happened at a red light. A black man, armed, forced his way into the vehicle and made her drive. She claimed he was calm, methodical, and cold. When he ordered her out of the car, she begged to get her children, but he refused. He drove off with her boys, still buckled into the back seat. She ran, knocked on a stranger's door, screaming, hysterical. That 911 call captured the panic in her voice. "He's got my kids." Police responded immediately. Flyers went up. News trucks rolled in. The FBI was notified. Amber alerts buzzed across radios. Roadblocks, volunteer search teams, helicopters. The entire country mobilized. Susan Smith's tearful interviews were everywhere. CNN, NBC, local news. Her husband, David, despite being separated from her, stood beside her, trembling, pleading for their boys. America watched. We grieved with them. We lit candles. We kept porch lights on. We prayed. And Susan basked in it, because behind the mascara-streaked cheeks and trembling lips was a woman who wasn't panicked. She was performing. Investigators were the first to notice the cracks. For starters, Susan's behavior behind closed doors didn't match the one she displayed in front of cameras. Alone, she was composed, relaxed, at times, even cheerful. One detective remembered seeing her excited before a TV interview, practically giddy to be on camera. Then, on cue, the sobs returned when the red light blinked on. Worse, she wasn't asking questions. Most parents of missing children are frantic, relentless. Did you check the lakes? Have you traced the call? Have you reviewed surveillance? Susan? She waited for updates. Calm, almost detached. Officers started to pay closer attention. They noticed she cried often, but never any tears. They also started pulling apart her timeline. Susan claimed the carjacker made her drive around for nearly an hour before kicking her out of the car. But traffic footage? Nothing. Witnesses? No one saw her. The red light she claimed to have stopped at? It was motion triggered. It wouldn't have turned red unless another car was there. And that night, there wasn't. No struggle. No physical injuries. No tire tracks. No evidence that anything she said was real. And yet she kept repeating it, eyes wide, voice trembling, to every camera that pointed her way. By day 3, the case had shifted from an urgent search for a carjacker to an urgent question: what is Susan Smith hiding? Detectives brought her in, asked her to repeat the story. Again, again, again. Each time, slightly different. How long did the drive last? She wasn't sure. Which direction was she facing? She guessed. Where exactly was the man standing? Did he say anything else? The inconsistencies piled up like cold case files. So they gave her a polygraph. She failed. Twice. They didn't tell the public yet. But the whispers were starting. David Smith, devastated, tried to believe her, tried to coach her through the tests, told her she was just too emotional to pass. But even he started to notice her grief was too performative. too concerned with how she looked, and too little about Michael and Alex. The community, once unified in hope, began to whisper. Maybe something was wrong. Maybe the person we trusted the most, the mother, wasn't the victim here. November 3rd, 1994, Day 9. Sheriff Howard Wells, a man Susan had known her entire life. Even her godfather, brought her in one last time. But this time, he came armed with something stronger than suspicion. He told her about the red light. He told her about the undercover officers stationed nearby that night, who saw nothing. And then he asked to pray with her. When the prayer ended, she broke. "I'm so ashamed." That's when she said it. "You don't understand. My children are not all right." And just like that, the mask fell. 9 days of lies. 9 days of tears without truth. 9 days of a nation hoping. Shattered in a single sentence. What came next will haunt the country for decades and destroy everything we thought we knew about grief, motherhood, and motive. Because Susan Smith hadn't lost her children. She had sent them, eyes wide and crying, to the bottom of a lake. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't an accident. It was a plan, played out over hours, finalized in seconds. And the only witnesses were too young to understand what was coming. November 3rd, 1994. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and fear. After 9 days of deception, Susan Smith, now slumped in her chair, did something unexpected. She asked to pray. Then, when the prayer ended, she looked up and said quietly, "My children are not all right." The words hit like a thunderclap. What followed was not a breakdown, but release, as if she had rehearsed this confession as thoroughly as her tears on TV. Susan began to talk. About loneliness, about failure, about despair so deep, she believed no one could pull her out of it, not even her own children. She admitted to driving aimlessly that night, not knowing what to do, that she had originally intended to drive into the water alone, to take her life and end the pain. But somewhere along that winding rural road, something darker crept in. She told them she didn't want to leave Michael and Alex behind to grow up without a mother. So instead, she chose to take them with her. Susan's written confession was meticulous, not erratic, not manic, neatly spaced, rounded cursive, 2 pages long, and disturbingly calm. "I had no hope," she wrote. "I couldn't be a good mom anymore, but I didn't want him to grow up without a mom." She described pulling into a boat ramp off John D. Long Lake, headlights cutting through the fog. It was quiet, still, not another soul around. 3 times, she tried to send the car forward. 3 times, she stopped herself, hand reaching for the emergency brake. But the 4th time, she didn't stop. She stepped out, closed the driver's door, reached through the window, and let go of the brake. The red Mazda rolled forward. Michael, 3 years old, asked her, "Mommy, where are we going?" Strapped in, helpless, confused, the car floated briefly, then sank into the dark, silent water, 18 feet down, 122 feet from shore. Susan turned her back, walked to the highway, and created a new story on the way. A carjacker, a red light, a mysterious black man with a gun. She knocked on a stranger's door, breathless, screaming. The lie had begun. The confession changed everything. But investigators still needed proof. Divers were dispatched to John D. Long Lake with sonar equipment. It didn't take long. A faint outline on the screen. A vehicle. Submerged. When the divers approached, they saw them. 2 small bodies still strapped into their car seats. The doors were locked. No signs of escape. No chance of survival. The car was lifted slowly from the lake. Reporters at the scene described the silence as deafening. Officers turned away. Some cried. Others stood frozen. Reality was no longer speculative. It was horrifyingly confirmed. Michael and Alex Smith were gone. Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children. The world watched, stunned. People who had cried with her turned, porch lights dimmed, hope extinguished. But this story wasn't over. In fact, it was only now entering its most twisted chapter. Because when detectives asked Susan the most important question, why, her answer didn't begin in the lake. It began with a letter. A simple letter from a man named Tom Finley. To understand how two innocent boys ended up at the bottom of a lake, we have to go back to Susan's childhood, back to the pain she never healed, and back to the man whose rejection became a deadly catalyst. The truth was that Susan hadn't snapped. She had been unraveling for years. It wasn't just a breakup. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a final push for a woman who had been drowning long before she ever reached the lake. The public wanted to know, why would a mother murder her own children? The answer, she said, came in a single envelope, one she opened alone and interpreted as a death sentence. This is where the story turns cruel and tragic and disturbingly calculated. Because to understand Susan Smith's motive, you have to go back, before the cameras, before the confession, before the lake. Susan Lee Vaughn, born September 26, 1971, Union, South Carolina. She was 6 years old when her father, Harry Vaughn, died by suicide. A quiet man, a fragile mind, a devastating legacy. Her mother, Linda, remarried soon after to a prominent local businessman named Beverly Russell, a respected figure in town and a leader in the Christian Coalition. Behind closed doors, he was a predator. When Susan was a teenager, she reported that Beverly Russell had sexually abused her. He later admitted to it. The abuse continued into her adulthood, a generational wound buried under religion, reputation, and silence. That kind of trauma doesn't just fade. It rewires you. And for Susan Smith, it planted a seed of emptiness that never fully filled. After high school, Susan got a job at Conso Products, a local textile plant. It was there she met David Smith, a quiet, hard-working man who would become the father of her children. Their relationship was fast, impulsive, messy. She got pregnant in 1991. They married that same year. But the marriage was broken from the start. Infidelity, fights, temporary separations. They both strayed, emotionally and physically. Still, they had 2 children. Michael Daniel Smith, born October 10th, 1991. Alexander Tyler Smith, born August 5th, 1993. They bought a small house, shared custody, tried to keep up appearances. But Susan was already drifting, restless, unsatisfied, resentful. She wanted more, and she believed she'd found it in a man named Tom Finley. Tom wasn't just anyone. He was the son of Susan's boss, young, wealthy, educated, a man with social capital, confidence, and charm. Everything David Smith wasn't. To Susan, Tom was an escape hatch, a chance to rewrite her story. But she ignored the warning signs. Tom never wanted commitment. He certainly didn't want children. And the deeper she fell for him, the more he pulled away. Then came the letter, written after Susan admitted she'd been sleeping with both Tom and his father. Yes, his father. Tom's response was sharp, cold, final. You will, without a doubt, make some lucky man a great wife, but unfortunately, it won't be me. He went further. I don't want children. I don't want the responsibility of your children either. I'm sure your kids are good kids, but it really wouldn't matter how good they may be. The fact is, I just don't want children. It was a clear rejection. And for Susan, it was a rejection not just of romance, but of motherhood. She read that letter, and somewhere inside her fractured psyche, it solidified into a horrifying logic. If the children are the problem, remove the problem. In her confession, Susan didn't hide it. She said she loved Tom, that she believed they had a future, and that the letter broke her. I was in love with someone very much, but he didn't love me and never would. What the world would later struggle with wasn't just that she killed her sons. It's that she did it for potential, for someone who didn't love her, for a fantasy that never existed. The kind of coldness it takes to silence a crying child, not in a moment of rage, but after hours of premeditation, is nearly unfathomable. Yet there it was, on paper, in her own rounded script, drawn with tiny hearts over the word heart. David Smith, who had supported her through the investigation, was shattered. He didn't find out from police. He found out, like everyone else, on television, that his sons were dead, that their mother had murdered them, that every interview they'd done together had been built on a lie. He said later, the world mourned with her, but she never mourned at all. As divers recovered the bodies, as the car emerged from the lake, as Susan was taken into custody, the nation turned. She wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. She was a symbol of betrayal. But as twisted as it all seemed, it was about to get worse. Because Susan Smith didn't stop manipulating after the murders. Once behind bars, she kept doing what she had always done best. Use people. And she was just getting started. Justice may have caught up with Susan Smith, but prison didn't break her. Because the woman America once pitted, then condemned, then locked away, wasn't done taking. Behind razor wire and steel doors, Susan built something new. Not redemption, not regret, but power. July 1995. Susan Smith sat inside a South Carolina courtroom, accused of murdering her 2 young sons. Prosecutors painted her as cold, premeditated, deceptive. They sought the death penalty. The defense didn't argue what she'd done. They argued why. Psychiatrists took the stand. They described a woman suffering from severe depression, abandonment trauma, and chronic feelings of worthlessness. They cited her father's suicide, her stepfather's sexual abuse, her string of unstable relationships. They called it despair. The prosecution called it manipulation. And when they played footage of her interviews, tearless cries, dramatic pauses, perfectly timed grief, the courtroom saw the cracks. But then something else happened. They played a reenactment of a car sinking, meant to show the horror of Michael and Alex's final moments. Susan's reaction? She giggled, not when it aired, before. As it loaded, the jury noticed. So did the press. In that moment, Susan revealed what law enforcement had suspected all along. This was a woman who knew how to perform emotion, but rarely felt it. After just 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty, 2 counts of murder. But despite the horror of her crimes, they stopped short of execution. Instead, they sentenced her to life in prison, with the possibility of parole in 30 years. What they didn't know then was that even life wouldn't contain her manipulation, because prison didn't change Susan Smith. It gave her a new stage. At Leith Correctional Institution, Susan quickly learned how to bend the system. She flirted with officers, traded favors with inmates, ratted others out to earn favor with guards. And before long, she was back in the headlines. Scandal number 1, the guard. In 2000, it was discovered that Susan had engaged in a sexual relationship with a prison guard. He served 3 months in jail. But that wasn't the last. Scandal number 2, Captain Alfred Rowe, the head of security at the prison. Susan used charm, flattery, and, according to testimony, strategic nudity to reel him in, flashing him after showers, flirting, exposing herself, confiding. Eventually, she offered oral sex. He accepted, and that single decision unraveled his life. When rumors spread, Susan turned on him, reported the incident. Rowe was arrested, fired, and placed on the National Sex Offender Registry. He lost his career, his reputation, nearly lost his marriage. Susan transferred to a new facility, closer to her mother, exactly what she'd wanted. And it didn't stop with staff. Susan formed romantic relationships with other inmates, including one who was black, the same race of man she had falsely accused 9 years earlier. According to a former cellmate named Christy, Susan once screamed at a woman during an argument, "I killed my kids. You think I care about yours?" Christy said Susan ran the place. She had money. She had allies. She had influence. How? Outside support. Men from across the country sent her letters, gifts, money. Some fell in love with her. Others were fascinated by her. One man reportedly planned to give her $200,000 upon her release. Another, a documentary filmmaker, deposited money into her prison account in exchange for private correspondence, a violation that got him banned and Susan disciplined. She even had a profile on writeaprisoner.com until she received so many disturbing messages and media coverage that it was eventually removed. Still, the money kept coming. As Christie put it, money talks. And Susan had a lot of it. While the rest of the world recoiled at her crime, a part of the world funded her comfort. She never asked directly. She didn't have to. Flattery, faith, loneliness. She knew the recipe. But behind every scandal, every power move, every manipulated relationship, there was still the same woman. The one who smiled into TV cameras. The one who knew how to make people look and how to make them believe. November 2024. 30 years after she drowned her sons, Susan became eligible for parole. The world watched again, but this time not with sympathy, with skepticism. 30 years ago, Susan Smith looked into the camera and begged for help. Her voice cracked. Her hands shook. Her tears never came. And now, 3 decades later, she sat in front of another audience. This time, the South Carolina Parole Board. A room colder, quieter, and less willing to believe. The question on the table wasn't about guilt. It was about change. Could a woman who drowned her sons manipulate the system one more time? November 2024. Susan Smith, now 53 years old, walked into parole hearing room with thin-rimmed glasses, graying hair, and the same carefully practiced sorrow she once wore on national television. The panel looked at her, flat, unforgiving, and for the first time in decades, Susan wasn't in control of the narrative. "Miss Smith," the chair began, "what would you like to tell us today?" Susan's voice cracked. Her eyes welled. I'm very sorry," she began. "I would give anything to go back and change it." She dabbed at her face, sniffled, paused just long enough to seem overwhelmed. But to anyone who remembered her face in 1994, it felt familiar, too familiar. The same sobs, the same breathless pauses. Still no tears, just like before. One board member asked if she'd been under the influence of drugs or alcohol the night she murdered her children. "No, ma'am," she answered softly. Another asked about her mental health treatment. "Yes, ma'am. I've worked with counselors. I want to keep doing that." Her voice shook, but her tone was deliberate, rehearsed. And when asked what she had learned in 30 years, that family is everything, that decisions don't just affect us, they affect the people we love. The words were right, but something was missing. Sincerity. David Smith, now remarried and a father again, sat quietly as she spoke. When it was his turn to address the board, his voice was low and steady. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a plan. She didn't just kill my sons. She made the entire country search for them, knowing they were dead. He reminded the board of how Susan blamed an innocent man, how she manipulated the press, how she cried without a single tear. She didn't break down in fear. She broke down when her story broke apart. His statement landed like a verdict. After deliberation, the board gave their answer. Parole denied. Unanimous. Susan Smith would not be released. Not in 2024. Not after 30 years. Not after everything. She cried again. Of course she did. But just like before, no tears. Susan remains at Leith Correctional Institution. Her next parole hearing is scheduled for November 2026. Few expect anything to change. She still receives money. Still attracts men from outside prison walls. Still knows how to turn pain into leverage. But the world has changed. There's no more public sympathy. Only the memory of what she did. And the images that haunt us still. A red Mazda, slipping beneath the surface. 2 boys, confused and calling out for their mother. A woman, walking up the ramp, rehearsing a lie. Your mama loves you so much. We wanted to believe her. And that may be the most terrifying part. If you found this retelling powerful, consider subscribing to Criminal Mind Tales. And let us know, should someone like Susan Smith ever get a second chance? Or are some crimes unforgivable?